Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Since President Bola Ahmed Tinubu assumed office, there has been major changes in various sectors of Nigeria, from the oil and gas to the education sector. The removal of petrol subsidy, which has led to the hike in price of fuel at filling stations, the unification of the Naira, and the signing of students' loan bill, among other policies the president has introduced. In education, parents and students of some universities across the country have cried out over the hike in school fees, saying the development could worsen their current economic pains and lead to mass students' withdrawals. Many universities, both federal and state-owned, have issued releases on upward adjustments of registration fees for courses being offered, with some of the increments spiking as high as 300%. While the student loan scheme provided for by the recently signed student loan bill was seen as a trigger for this upward review of registration fees, educationists and other stakeholders have said the lack of clarity on how the scheme would benefit Nigerians has further complicated the process with wider implications. Joining us on the morning show today to discuss the hike in the school fees by universities across the country is Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, a Rice News analyst and the Deputy Dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies, Base University, Abuja. Good morning, Prof. Good to have you join us, as always.
Good
morning.
Good morning, Steve, and good morning, Ojinika Okwe.
I knew you were going to do that. Good morning, Professor Adeniyi. How are you this morning?
All right, Prof.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, let us start this way. I mean, the conversation continues, as you know. Last week, of course, we touched on a number of these things, but it's been more than 30 days now that the new president assumed office, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the president of Nigeria. First, I would like you to, take a broad view of review in terms of the assessment of his 1 month in office, and then let's now dovetail into how this will affect the education sector. The key part of the reforms that he's been talking about is the fact that he has signed into law the student loan bill, and that from September, October this year, indigent students in tertiary institutions in Nigeria will be able to access that fund. But that is also coming at a time that many of the federal government-owned institutions, even state-owned ones, are hiking their tuition fees. People are crying. People are saying that, how do we deal with these multi-various issues that Nigerians are now being forced to cope with? What will be your assessment of the first 30 days of the president? And then let's talk education.
Okay, thanks, Steve, and Oji once more. I think it's okay to once more look at his administration, first from his own person, from his own background, his own worldview and socialization process. And of course, when you are asked to man any organization, what will reflect, first of all, is your personal disposition, your learnings, the nature of your experience will definitely rub off on the system that you are going to run. And that's what we are witnessing in President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. He's obviously a capitalist-oriented person. He believes in the free market economy. He believed in the contestation. He believed in competition, as the case could be. And of course, this cannot be surprising, considering where he had his education, the United States, the bastion of capitalism. And if we looking at him in governing Lagos, we saw how he freed quite a lot of things, brought in so many innovation. And from records, from what we've been told severally, he likely succeeded in many respects. So we shouldn't be surprised if we're seeing him trying to free a lot more things at the center. Subsidy is being removed, which means that let market forces determine the price of PMS. And of course, the Naira is also being floated, which is another kind of freedom that is being given in Naira. Let market forces determine the exchange rates. And if eventually subsidy is removed in other sectors, particularly education, I'm not going to be too surprised. But what is very, very important and what the government should be concerned about is what they do to mitigate the pains, the attendant pains that will come on the people, not just everybody, but those at the lower rung of the economic ladder, because this was, as in the circumstance, has been told to make sacrifices, but by default, they're already making sacrifices because they are barely able to make ends meet. They're just struggling to get by. The economy, even before now, was already on a tailspin. They hardly could survive. Things are difficult. And in the new administration, we're having an administration that is probably rightly freeing up things, allowing the market forces to determine processes, compliance with the true capitalist economy, which we are trying to be if we are not already there. So this is all right, this is in order, but we should also go beyond that and understand that our institutions are not as strong as the ideal capitalist systems of the West. Our institutions are not strong, our structures are weak, and our people are not as understanding, they are not as educated as those ones. So our systems are still weak, institutions are weak to withstand the byproduct, the after effects, of trying to create a completely market economy in different sectors. And education sector will definitely come under the eye view of the president in no time, like we're probably seeing, and like you alluded to. First, with the loan scheme. The loan scheme is welcome to help those who cannot go to school and that have the potential. Is fine. But what more are we expecting? Suspicions are high that school fees might be returned to to the universities. If you are returning it, you have to understand that, again, that you are going to shut out a lot more people, other sections of the populace that may not be able to afford it. So what palliatives are you bringing up? And finally, is also this question that has featured in many circles, which is the philosophical, or the plea that the populace should make sacrifice. And I said it earlier, the populace is already making sacrifice by default, but we need examples from those who are leading us that they too are ready to make sacrifices. The symbolism is very, very important. The optics around how they showcase the perks and privileges of office, how they take advantage of these things will matter. If we see them denying themselves of some things, toning down on the tendency to luxuriate, I'm very confident that members of the society will also key in and we can all be on the same page towards a better Nigeria.
All right, Professor Adeniyi, as Steve had alluded in his introduction, as you know as well, that some universities have hiked up tuition fees as high as 300%. Parents, stakeholders have said that the recently signed student loan bill triggered the hike in the tuition fees. Others have blamed it on inflation. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But regardless, majority of parents are complaining they cannot afford the fees, and they say Tinubu should, provide mitigating factors and revamp the economy before removing the subsidy in the education sector. Otherwise, you will see massive dropouts. Is that a likely situation that we'll be facing?
Well, even before now, Oji, there's a way in saying that the price of PMS has determined every other price in this country. Once the price goes up, it affects every other sector of the economy. So if it is also affecting, correctly or incorrectly affecting the educational sector, I'm not going to be too surprised. But first, we have to also realize that some of these universities are barely managing to stay afloat. Yes, they may get subvention, they may be getting allocation. It's never enough. Some of them also rely on school fees to augment the subvention they get. And it's been very difficult to activate all the opportunities for funding university education in this country because they are existing within the framework, the ecosystem of a weak political economy. And if you are doing that, you cannot internalize your hope. The only other option you have is to externalize it, hoping on grants, hoping on research funding, hoping on donor agencies. And all these philanthropic organizations too. They are also they can also be very critical, very mindful of where their funds are going to. If they see that your environment is not right, that you do not have the rightful utilities to deliver insightful, appropriate, thorough research, they're likely to look away from you. So if you look at it critically, you also see that internal environment is not suitable to harness funding opportunities, and the external variant is also problematic, because of the absence of confidence on the part of those who are supposed to give to you. So where then will the university get the funding from? They will hope on subvention allocation. That is marginal. And the next option again is fees. And that's why many of them are probably thinking that they should hype it. Most of them can actually not help themselves. And if they cannot help themselves, it's only government that can come in the circumstance. But if they have to stay afloat, if they have to survive, it can be very expensive running a university system, no doubt, because there are so many things involved: structures, infrastructure, utilities, electricity, security, books, etc., etc. And do not forget, resources that includes books, can be changing, especially in the times that we are in. Even in modern research culture, if your reference, if your literature is more than 5 years old, it might be rejected in some circles, which means that you need funds to be updating your library as often as possible. Not just physical versions of publications, but the online version. And of course, you need funds for these as well, So it's a continuous thing, and that's why you may want to sympathize with them if they are increasing the fees. But again, we have to go back to government, What can government do in this circumstance? Are you going to come to the aid of the universities so that they will not put the pain, on parents who are going to pay the fees? Or you are going to give help the students to be able to pay their fees? Or on the longer run, are you going to reflate the economy, stimulate all the multipliers, so that the resources can be available for people to be liquid enough, to pay for their bills, to pay their bill, as the case could be, Oji.
All right, Prof. I would like to know your thoughts on the recent declaration, shall we say, by the Vice-Chancellor of UNIBEN, Professor Lilian Salami, who, as you know, is also the chair of the Committee of Vice-Chancellors for Nigerian Universities, when she said, I think in May or last month, that the federal government can no longer solely fund tertiary education. And she added that, even in spite of TED Fund and a few other intervention funds like that, that is still grossly inadequate. Will that lend credence to the sort of hike in fees that we are witnessing? And will that be even though it might be the reality, but will it be a good signal at this point that Nigerians obviously are going through a lot? What do you make of what Professor Salami was putting across in that speech that she delivered?
I think it's quite a lot that Nigerians are going through, and I cannot agree more with Prof on those submissions. Realizing that education is capital intensive, and we are also existing in a situation where universities are correctly multiplying, but multiplying to compete in a space where the economy is declining, and the hope of it regaining its strength, is still ambivalent. Well, there's still a lot of ambiguity about the prospect of our economy, irrespective of the new energy that the new president is putting into it. But I would just say that we cannot, run away from the ability of government, to be innovative about how universities are going to be funded. In the past, through the struggles of ASU, we have had, that's led to the creation of TED Fund, for instance, and of course, TED Funds come in essentially in the provision, through the provision of infrastructure. But infrastructure alone does not a university make. There's also the soft aspect of it, which is research funding. To what extent would you say there are funds for research, And what about utilities? I mentioned electricity earlier on. Overall, in the larger Nigerian space, we know how troublesome this one is. And knowledge sharing, knowledge impartation, knowledge production, expect some level of predictability, some level of convenience, how conducive the environment is, is a determiner. There are determinants of how qualitative your productivity and efficiency will be in those sectors. But if they are suspect, if they are inadequate, of course, there will be arguments around low quality. But funds remain the only thing that can help you augment some of these things that you require to have an improved, enhanced education. So what the Vice Chancellor is saying is definitely truthful, is at the center of leadership, and he knows his audience. What we have to do again is for the next administration to be mindful of the kind of human resources that they get to man or to manage the education sector. It shouldn't be like our last experience, where an outlier, was in charge. With every due respect, as the Minister of Education, we need an experienced educationist, maybe most likely a professor, somebody that is well-traveled, well-versed, that can be creative and ingenious, and provide the rightful idea on how to propel our university education to the next level. Because it remains shameful that every time we see one ranking or the other, we struggle to find Nigerian university at the top. The silver lining seems to be in the adventures of the private universities, that in my own reckoning are doing very, very fantastically well and are pretty well competing with the public institutions. So hope is gradually coming in from those sectors. But do not forget, private universities are largely private funded, and sometimes they may also be subjected to the vagaries of problematic funding, resource generation and application, as the case could be. But I think that we need to take a holistic look, but that look, must be a process that is managed by an expert, a very experienced person, and I dare say that Nigeria has them aplenty. If the new administration look very well, because leadership is key to all these things we're talking about. If the leadership of that sector is not right, at the level of the ministry, at the level of the agencies concerned about it, we shouldn't expect that we'll find something good at the end of the day. Steve and Oji.
All right. Professor Adeniyi, I hope that you can shed light on my next question. As you know, educationists and other stakeholders have said that the lack of clarity on how the student loan scheme will benefit Nigerians is still up in the air. I don't know if you can shed some light on the benefits, because they say that the process of, accessing this loan is too cumbersome. I mean, is a student loan a problem? As you know, getting a loan in Nigeria is historically a chore, because, as banks are always asking too much. This scheme, they're asking that, you provide, two guarantors as well as a civil servant with, 10 years post-pay. I mean, tell us how this scheme will benefit Nigerians.
Yeah, first, Oji, any loan will actually be beneficial if properly applied. The problem is just attitude of the people towards credit. If you say you want to use loan for business and you take it to buy a new car, to marry more wives, or to go on holiday somewhere, of course, that's consumptive. I mean, you're not going to get anything productive from it, and of course, you have problems paying back. It's generally an attitudinal flaw not to be able to use loan appropriately, and that's what I think the problem financial institutions face. That's why sometimes they can be very strict, asking for appropriate guarantor that will be able to pay back in the case in which you default. So I'm not going to be surprised if we are seeing that level of strictness being applied to the nascent educational loan. But we cannot undermine the place of education loan anywhere in the world, because most times people are actually educated through facility. Otherwise, a lot of people would not be able to go to school because the larger population of the society is often vulnerable, is often on the other side in terms of the income class. You know, they are on the other side. They need some kind of support to be able to fund their education, as the case could be. And of course, in very sophisticated, advanced countries that we often ape and idolize, we know they have loan facilities in place. And sometimes when parents can even afford it, the parents keep their money, use it for something else, and allow their wards to access those loans so that by the time they finish school, 2 years after, they start paying well, you know, they start paying back. And you see this thing functioning well, allowing the students to be very responsible in the future, to understand that in the future you already have, in the near future you already have a commitment to government, you know. You see them being very responsible, being very productive, being very sensible. You know, so there's nothing wrong with loan facility, really. But again, to come back to our own question, we had some of these variants in the past. You know, many of them went moribund, many of them went under. To what extent this time around will we be able to implement it properly? You know, what mechanisms, you know, what mechanism is the new president or the new administration going to put in place to be able to improve on the effectivity of the loan process? And that's why we're saying that overall, at some point, it's going to be under the purview of the Minister of Education. And that's why we're saying that if we have the right person there, we should expect that the advice the person will be giving to government, you know, to those in charge of the process, you know, will also be helpful into letting us have, you know, a good loan system, you know. And again, I remember to the question around TED funds and UBEC, you know, TED fund has been very good as an intervention agency, but we know those kind of intervention too can have problem. You know, oftentimes they try to be fair in terms of how they distribute resources between public universities, comprising federal and state. But of course, there are also criticisms in circles, you know, that is sometimes not fair enough, you know. And of course, there are also arguments that resources can never be enough, you know. So rather than doing, engaging in intervention ad infinitum, you know, can we rather think about strengthening the entire system so that universities can run like the appropriate entity, appropriate organizations that they are, you know, as the beacon of social excellence, you know, as a representative of what is possible in the society. You know, can we develop our system like that, you know, as against, you know, thinking that we can support them through intervention. That is irrespective of the good sides of TED Fund, of UBEC, and all other intervention agencies, as the case could be, Oji and Steve.
All right, Prof. I mean, yes, we will be, you know, racing towards rounding off, but of course, there are a few questions that I would still like to ask you. First, as it concerns, you know, education and the student loan thing. Do you, given what we know about it, do you think that that this administration will be ready for disbursement by September, October, as they are proposing? No minister yet. The guidelines are still hazy, a bit sketchy. So do you think that they will be ready? Will it be right to rush into it, given that there are still a few rough edges to straighten up? And then you've explained how, of course, how it works elsewhere. But a lot of people are saying that what we have, at least the document that has been signed into law, is far, you know, different from what you have as to, you know, student loan either in North America or in Europe. Here we're talking of 500,000 naira a combined income for parents of beneficiaries. But then, I mean, that's like 42 or thereabout thousand a month. How many people in this category will be able to go through the stress and, if you like, the torture of fulfilling the requirement that will make them, you know, pay this kind of, benefiting from this kind of a thing? We do not even know how much each student will be entitled to if they succeed in getting the loan. And at a time that there are hikes in fees, doesn't mean that the loans too will graduate as things, go up as far as school fees and hostel accommodation fees are concerned. I mean, in other words, do you think that it may be necessary to have this thing reviewed and revisited again so that we have a workable document that really can benefit people who really need them?
All right, thank you, Steve. First, I think if there is a will, there can always be a way. If government work around the clock, if they pull all these stops, I think they can deliver the goods around the loan in no time, and that's up to the administration really. There are some fine lines that you have highlighted. All these ones can be sorted out, as the process continues, And do not forget again that no money can ever be enough, Most of the time when you are giving a loan, it sounds as a loan officially, but at the end of the day, it's just a support, and nothing is stopping you from getting any other support from anywhere else to enhance your ability to go through the educational process. Just a kind of support. Government may not be able to meet all your needs, and no one is saying that if the government becomes responsive enough, they can not also continue to increase the loan amount. It can continue with time, but it's important to even have a benchmark first to start, and of course to have appropriate criteria, to determine who gets it and who does not get it, But some of these fine details can actually be strengthened, can be ironed out when the process commences, And again, it takes us back to the question I've been emphasizing, which is the question of leadership. We're not talking about presidential leadership now. We're talking about agency, MDA leadership. The appropriate leadership should be able to provide the right innovative, creative, ingenious solution, that will lead us to the resolution of the critical points that you have highlighted, But it's a welcome development, really, if we can revive the loan idea. We had it in the past, particularly in some northern states. They were very responsible to their citizens, even in local institutions and in foreign institutions. And it led to the education of many people, and of course some southern states were also involved, Some of us benefited from foreign assistance, foreign funding assistance. That's why I'm able to sit here and be speaking English to you today, So the place of loan, the place of facility, cannot be discounted, in any system, if we have to grow human resources, enhance human capacity, because the place of human participation in the system cannot be undermined if a nation is to develop, as the case could be, Steve and Oji.
Yeah, I got you clearly, but do you really think that this can roll out by the next academic session, the beginning of next academic session? You really think it can roll out?
Yeah, it can't, Steve, if they want. Look, Leila, I'm a member of a committee in Kogi State for the establishment of Kogi State University in Kaba. The governor set up the committee just about a month ago, and that committee has already acquired a license for the university. The students will matriculate in September. The site is ready. Everything is ready, and this is because the governor is ready. He had the political will. People may say it was a political move. Yes, it was a smart one to benefit for the benefit of the educational interest of that section of Kogi State. So if there is the will, he had the will, and of course the way came. At the federal level too, if government has a will, there will always be the way. It's a matter of determination. It's a matter of mindset. How ready are you to get this implemented, as the case could be? Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, a rights analyst and of course of the Base University in Abuja. Thank you indeed.